William, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Firstly, just tell us a little bit about uh, your business, and then a little bit about your background and how you sort of started that journey.
Yeah, sure. So I've known my co-founder Rob for 20 odd years. We met at the first day of uni
Right.
at UNSW. We were studying the same degree. It's a pretty small cohort. They only had 25 people. 4 or 5 years ahead of us were Mike and Scott from Atlassian. We did business and IT, a co-op scholarship. And I like to talk about that because at least at the starting point, because people get a sense of the foundation of our company.
Yep.
But once I left UNSW, I decided that I liked IT and I went down the path of doing management consulting. So I joined Deloitte, which was a really good place to start your foundations. I learned everything from how to build an Excel model, build PowerPoints, talk to CEOs, really well-rounded skills. And really focused on retail banking. And I was really at that cusp of the retail banking technology transformation. In 2003, my first job was at CBA doing NetBank version 1. So that kind of gives you a feel for my early introduction to enterprise technology. Whereas my co-founder Rob, he took more of a sales and marketing path. So he joined Procter and Gamble out in Singapore. And he focused on consumer data and insight. And he headed up like a brand like Head and Shoulders for Southeast Asia, as an example. And it kind of gives you a flavor for like the left brain, right brain thinking between myself and Rob. I'm like the management consultant. What's the plan? Work backwards. What are the goals? How do we achieve it? Whereas Rob is like, what does the customer want? Let's think big picture. Like, oh, you're solving a small thing. How do you solve it for the masses? And so I'd say that like those two things came together and we realized that we were actually quite a formidable team. And then in 2015, I had a bad delivery experience buying something online. And I said to Rob, I said, mate, I got this Dyson delivered to the office. It was supposed to be delivered to home. Like something broken here because I had to drive my car to the PwC office where I was working at the time, lug this big vacuum down. And we took a very first principles view of the world. And we were like, if you look at e-commerce, the merchandising or the shop front was being commoditized by the likes of Shopify and Magento. Payments was being standardized by Braintree, PayPal, Adyen, Stripe. And then the final frontier was logistics. So like retailers spend all this money to get you to part ways with your cash, but then they hand it over to a carrier and then it disappears off the face of the earth in terms of job done. And so what we realized was that this fragmentation was actually ripe for disruption because retailers want to focus on marketing, product, and sales, and they don't want to focus on the back end stuff. And that's where the genesis of Shippit became. And the product that we built is effectively a integration layer that connects close to 50 sales channels, so warehouse management systems, point of sales, e-commerce platforms, to a network of over 200 carriers. And so carriers are the couriers who are doing the deliveries. And we have a matchmaking algorithm that sits in between, taking that data and matching it to the best carrier. And our pitch to our customers, which are retailers, we'll save up to 20% on your shipping costs with a multi-carrier solution. We improve operational efficiency, one API, one workflow, global access to carriers, and then improving customer satisfaction. So we look after the notifications engine, post-purchase experience, tracking SMSs and the like.
Yeah. And so before that, what was you talked about having a bad retail experience. So like you say, the retailers are really focused on the transaction, and then the other stuff has to be done, it has to be delivered, but that was less of a focus and obviously problematic, especially for the end user or the customer on the
buyer.
Retailer side. Yeah, the buyer. Yeah, thanks. But so is that what's the pitch from that perspective to the retail that makes it so compelling?
Is it for a retailer to offer a product like Shippit? Well,
Yeah.
we actually sit behind the scenes. So our customer is the merchant. And so we do offer live quoting at the checkout, which means you can have DoorDash or Uber do the delivery, and that can be delivered instantaneously. And we provide the delivery option at checkout. Or we can actually just sit behind the scenes. And if it's a standard delivery, express delivery, we're just the algorithm that chooses it on behalf of the merchant. But really, the magic comes after the purchase has happened, where you get all of the customer experience stuff that Shippit offers, live tracking for GPS tracked orders, single tracking experience for receivers to be able to then know exactly where their parcels are at any given point. And then they get notifications on when there's delays. So for example, if we know on average it takes 1 day to get from Sydney to Melbourne and it's 2 days in, we will tell the merchant, we'll tell the receiver, hey, it's been delayed and this is one of the reasons why.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And as far as when you started the business, you obviously had a vision for what it would look like now. And fast forward, I mean, you started 8, 9, 10 years ago. Is that about right?
Yeah, 8 years ago, 2015.
8 years ago. Okay. So you had that vision of what it would look like. How far from that is it in terms of what you initially sort of were setting out to do?
Yeah, massively. In 2015, what we were the first iteration of Shippit was a on-demand carrier. So we were actually focused on 3-hour delivery, not too dissimilar from a Sherpa or a Uber, or back then it was Go Catch. Do you remember the taxi app?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then we were building this platform to allow for on-demand deliveries, time slotted between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. at night. You can, as a user, nominate a 3-hour window and we'll get it delivered in that 3-hour window. But the first customer that we launched with was a retailer in Surrey Hills, suburb in Sydney. She was a high-end lifestyle seller of homeware products called The Minimalist. I remember selling to her, like right in front of her. And we offered our plugin for free. And we asked her how many deliveries she did a month. And she said, oh, yeah, I do about 1,000 to 2,000 a month. And we were like, great, you're a perfect client because high-end goods, time slotted delivery just makes sense. And then it was over the first weekend that we didn't get any orders. And we're like, hang on, this is weird. Like, how come people aren't like choosing us as a delivery option? The second week when we went live, we actually quoted free delivery. So it meant that we would absorb the cost of delivery. And we only did 1 or 2 shipments. And then we went to revisit the customer. They said to us, hey, Will, the reason why you aren't getting delivery is because when people live near us, they come to the store and they buy from us. And that's the only time slot delivery works, where it's within 20, 30 kilometers. And they were like, holy shit, 98% of the market is actually standard delivery, 1 to 5 business days. So from there, we quickly changed the business model to focus on being every option at checkout, not just one option. And then one of our marquee customers, Harvey Norman, our first enterprise customer, they sat down with us and we co-built the solution. So in the old days, how they would work is an order comes in online, it goes to a store, they'll go pick it, someone sits there with an Australia Post portal, types it all in, manually sticks on a label.
Okay.
So back then, our system would automate that whole process. So the store staff could really focus more on the sales in store, and then they can do the fulfillment at odd times because they don't need to sit there and just type in labels anymore. So the business pivoted from a 3-hour delivery service provider to doing all the different types of deliveries. And that's where we are now. So we look after customers of all shapes and sizes. The Rolodex of Westfield, I'd say, Kmart, Big W, Target, Sephora, Nike, Harvey Norman, Cotton On, all the big guys. And then also a long tail of small to medium retailers as well, who've got different needs, but yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of that growth that's come through, I see you guys have, obviously growing organically, but also starting to acquire other businesses in recent times. Is that obviously it's a concerted approach to do both? Does one have more, you tend towards more than one than the other, or what's your strategy?
So, our thinking behind that has been like the capital markets in 2015 are very different to the capital markets of 2020 and the now of 2023, right? And I would say when we started our business, there weren't too many sources of capital at the time. The superannuation companies weren't funding VCs. I would say that happened in like 2018, 2019. And so raising capital for us was quite difficult. So we had to really prove our straps in organic growth. And as I mentioned to you before, our customer segments are both enterprise and SME because the enterprise retailers have a long sales cycle. And so you need to try to offset the longer sales cycle with small to medium businesses, which are effectively our run rate business. And then we were one of the lucky beneficiaries of COVID. So that massive structural change where you and I were working from home, e-commerce was like huge over that period. It was like 30, 40, 50% as a percentage of total retail sales during COVID. It's currently around 16. And so that structural change has meant that we were able to grow really quickly because our revenue model is a transaction fee as well as a subscription fee. So as the market grows, we grow as well. And then I would say that over the last 12, 24 months, there's been a bit of a correction. The correction in the sense that we're still 30, 40% plus pre-COVID numbers in terms of volume. But at Shippit, what we've been able to do is ride on that growth and really raise capital along the way, which has helped us fuel our expansion plans. And our expansion plans have looked further abroad in terms of different territories and different products. So your question on like, is it organic growth or M&A? We have a North Star in 2025 of hitting 200 million deliveries without waste. What that means is 200 million deliveries going through our platform on an annualized basis. We're currently sitting on about 75. So what that means is doubling year on year for the next 3 years.
Yep.
So we will always look at organic and acquisition. We're fortunate enough now that we've got a pretty strong balance sheet to allow us to be able to fund some of those acquisitions. But the way that we analyze the market is very much in terms of the e-commerce value chain, from checkout through to the person who's giving you the parcel. What are all the different products that exist along that value chain? And do we want to build by partner? That's really how I think about it. And so there's some things that one of the acquisitions we made was Premonition, which is the last mile routing app. And those guys have been in business for 10 years. There was no way that we could build that business from scratch again. So it made sense for us to make an acquisition there. But then other parts of our business were like small to medium business fulfillment. So pick, pack, label, that's something that we're building, right? And so the order fulfillment process, which allows you as a home lifestyle retailer, you can use our system to help improve the efficiencies of being able to get your deliveries out the door. And so I read a book, Beyond the Hockey Stick for Growth. And I think like what they looked at were the 100 companies that were multi-generational and it very much follows what they call the power curve. So and one of the themes that they saw was turning M&A or programmatic M&A as a way to grow. And I think the benchmark was don't target companies that are more than 20% of the size of your business because you'll find it hard to swallow. And so if I use that as the framework in terms of how big we'd look at, and then secondly, what we look at is different products that sit along that value chain.
Yeah. And where it makes sense to build, you'll build. And if it makes sense to acquire, because like you say, you couldn't replicate that if you tried for the same amount of money. Well, obviously it makes sense to buy, especially with the synergies, right?
Yes. And like, it's just classic return on investment and how quickly you want to realize some of that revenue. So at Shippit, we've got a pretty good like operating system as a company where we do annual quarterly planning and we always focus on what the customer wants and what the customer problems are and work backwards from that. And then we look at what the solve is. And the solve could be we build it ourselves or we'll buy it.
Yeah. And you spoke before about how much capital markets have changed in the last sort of few years, especially the last couple of years. But I also note that you've raised quite a substantial amount of money sort of last year, I think. Was it 65 million or something like that?
Yeah. We've raised to date, we've raised 100 million since we started in 2015. Yeah.
And was there a valuation or pre-money val at about 300 last time or something
Yep.
along that? Okay,
Yeah.
so in terms of, and that's at a tough time, right? I mean, if we're talking to about a year ago, May, when you've raised last, or
Yeah, well, you'll soon realize that what happens in the media is about 6 months delayed from when the actual
yeah, okay,
deal happens.
yeah,
So we actually got the deal away at the end of 2021, 2021.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And okay, so that the timing is quite different because that few months does make a massive difference between
massive.
when articles came out, which was around April, May,
Yeah.
versus by the sounds of it, when the deal was done was end of 21, where in between that time things have changed quite dramatically. So my
Correct.
question was going to be, how do you get that done in such a difficult time? And the answer is act
Well,
sooner.
I think, yeah, I think that like, because I'm still like my focus at Shippit is really around growth, investor relations, like capital, right? And so, like the way I've looked at it is companies with great unit economics are still being funded. Companies who can do it for like highly efficiently. So looking at key metrics such as the rule of 40, the magic number, like these are the things that um, both public and private markets are really attuned to right now. I still get the market reports from most of the major banks, and the equities that have been doing well over the last 6 months have been those who have been going like efficiently. So I'm thinking of the likes of Zero, WiseTech, ReadyTech from a public perspective, where their rule of 40 sits over the 30 mark, right? So I still think that there's a lot of capital out there to be deployed. I still think that fund managers need to make their management fee somehow by deploying, and they're focused on companies that are doing it efficiently.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. I mean, from that perspective, um, when you go to market, what are the key things you're looking for from a VC when you raise? Because it's one thing to raise money, but it's really important, presumably, to who you partner with.
Yeah, 100%. Like one of the pieces of advice I got given very early on was treat it like a marriage, because these people will be around the table for the next 10, 20 years. And like myself and Rob, we have a philosophy of not being the smartest people in the room. We don't have a logistics background. B, we're not technical founders. And C, we have a superpower, I think, getting the best team around us, synthesizing what they're good at, and then coming up with the plan. And so if you look at our investor set from 2015, we had one investor who was willing to fund the whole round, but myself and Rob were very deliberate around looking for someone who had go-to-market experience, logistics experience, retail experience, and funds management. And then we had like lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. So our angel round was very typical of the way of working that we've got in terms of assembling a team. And then as we started to grow over the last couple of years, the next big round we did was really focused on Southeast Asia, because we're based here now. Who's here that can give us access to market knowledge, to customers, to ecosystem partners? And then thirdly, who could have a balance sheet that could probably ride out the next couple of years for us? And so that's the approach that we've taken. And we're fortunate enough that we've had pretty good business fundamentals, because we had started the company in a capital constrained environment, as I mentioned, in 2015. So as much as 2021 was easier than 2015, 2015 was tough because there was a handful of like funds out there, and they all said no
Yeah.
to us. So
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I bet they all wish they sort of said yes now, but that's just part of the journey, right?
yeah. So
And in terms of your strengths, you talked about how one of your superpowers there is to build the right team around you and that sort of stuff. What would you describe as your biggest strengths, and how do you and Rob as co-founders complement each other in
yeah.
terms of your strengths?
I think I was trained as a management consultant. So our operating system is a Gantt chart, and getting people on milestones and dates and getting them bought into the vision is something that I'm very big on. Strategy is very much 90% people. Like you can come up with the ideas, but how do you get people bought into what you're doing as being the right thing? And I think I've got a really good strength in that. And I think the pattern matching, so looking at previous experiences, other industries, they're things that I'm really focused on because I always have this attitude of someone solved this before. We're not the only ones that have solved this. So, like other markets, other industries, surely there's a way that's been done because what we're doing isn't rocket science. Whereas Rob, he is more very customer, like very customer centric. Uh, he's looking 2 to 3 years ahead. Where is the market going? And if I was to put myself into the customer's shoes, would they buy this product or not? Right. And so I think that those are the complementary skills that we've got in the sense that he's got the right brain, creative, pushing the boundaries in terms of where our customers are going to buy from us. Whereas me, I've got the pragmatic, what's the plan? How do we get there? And to be honest, like, what's the shortest path possible to
Yeah.
realize value? Yeah.
Yep, makes complete sense. Because that execution part is so critical, right? It's one thing to have all the vision, but to be able to execute the plan, nothing
Yeah,
happens unless things get executed.
I think like a lot of people say, oh, like execution is 70, 80% of the battle, but I really like, I'm not sure about that. I think like you need to have both to get the buy-in. And that being said, though, like myself and Rob also flip roles sometimes. Like it's really strange, depending on the domain, like or depending on how much like research we've done into a specific topic. Where like I'm devil's advocate, or he'll be devil's advocate, and then he'll sometimes build the plan in terms of what the stepping stones to get to an outcome are. Me being in Southeast Asia is an example. Like I'm seeing the future of e-commerce here, social commerce, TikTok shop. Like these things haven't hit Australia yet, and I imagine they will. So like now I'm bringing that information into the company, and it's just interesting how the ebbs and flows of us as founders changes as not only the macro environment but also what the company demands of us.
And how different is it being over there now? Because you're in Singapore, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've been here since
And
November.
yeah, so how different is that experience? Running the business or that part of the business at the very least from there.
Yeah, I think our chairman, David Gordon, he joined us about 18 months ago. And he said, well, like one of you guys need to go there because it can, his analogy was it can look like a noodle, smell like a noodle, taste like, but it might not taste like a noodle. How will you know unless you're there, right? And so I came here in November, and I would say my number one focus here is like I'm very good at 0 to 1. So basically building a company from like scratch into something that someone can pick up and scale. And so that's what I'm doing here in Singapore, and our focus is on the Southeast Asian market. We made an acquisition last year of a company called Logistic. They were very helpful in being able to help us connect all the last mile carriers. So we've done that over the last month or so. And we've now got a product which services the entire region. And I think your question specifically on managing the company, a couple of things that have been really beneficial are one, I'm at arm's length now, so I can be like super objective, and like I will spend time reviewing documents that are sent to me and really put on that critical thinking hat, which I don't think that I could otherwise have while sitting in Shippit HQ in Sydney. Because I think it's very easy to get caught up in a lot of the environment, the people aspect of things. Whereas if I'm just looking at the slides and the numbers, that's telling me something, and I can really provide that objective view. So that's been a big tick. Yeah, number two, I think that being on the ground, like we pivoted in the last couple months, like in terms of how we're going to market. I was very much focused on Singapore. When I landed here, I was like, shit, it's such a small market here. Actually, it's Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia. Like that's where we need to be. And so February 1, we launched in Malaysia after me being on the ground for 3 months. So that's been like a pretty big change for us. And then I think thirdly, there was no way that we could have gotten the traction here in Asia without me knowing some of the things I know now. So not only is it markets, but it's also channels. So partnering closely with the likes of Shopify, Shopline, and working with like the e-commerce enablers. That's something that I think that would have been really difficult to do had I been in Australia.
Yeah. Do you think that that move is, possibly the difference between success or failure when you do that sort of thing, or it just reduces the time it takes to do things?
I'm not sure. Like there's a few different ways that I've seen this done, right? Like I know Nick from Afterpay, he spent like the first one year in the US as they did that launch. I know Mike from SiteMinder, he didn't move. Like he stayed in Australia and implanted a team on the ground. I think it changes by industry, vertical, and by product that you're selling. But to be quite honest, I think that like a founder needs to be the tip of the spear when it comes to go to market. It's very different when I'm sitting right in front of Nike in Singapore or Uniqlo in Singapore and I'm selling them the product because they're like, holy shit, you're like the founder. And then I can make changes to the commercial model on the spot. And I don't think that as a business development lead has got that flexibility. Whereas
Yeah.
for me, 0 to 1, I'm like, I just need any customer. Let's go. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
But you're really getting to taste it. And well, I guess at the end of the day, like your chairman said, you can taste the noodle, right? You're getting a real taste for that because you're on the ground and you've got that sense of exactly how the lay of the land is.
exactly. Yeah. So I think maybe to answer your question, it definitely accelerates things. Right. But we gave it a go for a year and a half without a founder being involved, and we just didn't get the runs on the board. And we were like, "Oh shit, was it the COVID thing? Like, because that was peak COVID flighty." But having been on the ground now, I can just see the difference.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. And in terms of, some of your weaknesses, how do you overcome those? And again, with you and Rob as co-founders, how do they offset each other?
I think taking like 360 feedback has been something that's been like systematized at Shippit. And I'd say myself and Rob take feedback from the board and also our direct reports. And so we have a people management, performance management framework where getting feedback from your peers and also those direct reports is crucial. And that kind of stuff feeds into like your own personal development style. Like I would say that over the last 8 years, our business has grown like year on year, 100% year on year, right? For the last 5 years. Now that we've come off the back of COVID, it's come back a little, but at the end of the day, like my philosophy is the company is growing year on year. I need to grow year on year, and so does Rob. And as the company changes, the demands from me back then are very different to the demands of me now. And so we very much carved out the business to focus on what we're good at and not focus on things that we're bad at. And so if I was just to think about weaknesses in general, I think that like sometimes I fail to see the wood through the trees as I get really bogged down in the detail. I need a partner like Rob to extract me out and say, hey, look, you just need to take a step back. And this is the goal that we're trying to achieve. Um, and equally on that note, I would say that like having Rob and I having a system in place for us to continue to spar every day, every week.
Yeah.
Like I talk to Rob more than I talk to my wife. First person in the morning, last person at night.
Yep.
Scares her, my wife. But again, it's like it is a marriage, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Absolutely.
and it's the same thing with investors as well. Like I'll pick up the phone and I'll talk to them just to give me a sense check on like, am I crazy? And so I think to overcome some of these things, it's being open and being honest about where you think you need to improve. Yeah.
And when you talk about seeing the forest, the trees type thing, and all that sort of, is that because are you a perfectionist? Is that what gets you bogged down in detail, or is there something else that like from that perspective? I just find that interesting.
Yeah, not at all. Rob's the perfectionist. I'm just
Okay.
like, just get it done.
Yeah.
But sometimes I can get caught up in the minutia of data where it becomes analysis paralysis. And
Right.
like,
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
and I might spend like a whole day looking at a model and like I won't like come out of that. And it's like, hang on, like what are we trying to achieve here? Like what are we trying to solve for? And sometimes I struggle to zoom out. But then now I've kind of course corrected by like also creating a bit of a system in my calendar where I've got like blocks of time where, hey, this is deep thinking time, and this is time I'm working with like clients, and this is time that I'm working with the internal team. And it's interesting now. I don't know if you've seen in Google Calendar, they have a measurement on the bottom left where it's like how much time you spend in things.
Right.
And yeah, and it's a really good tool because it allows you to adjust based on the demands of the business.
Yeah, because you're right. Sometimes you get into that deep thinking sort of stuff, especially with data. Um, you can get lost in the different insights you can gain and all those stuff. But like you say, you've got to come back a little bit sometimes and go, well, hang on, that is all super interesting. And you
Yeah,
might get some sort of serendipitous insight that is fantastic, but you got to step back sometimes and say, well, actually, we're not trying to solve that right now. We'll look at that right now. What have we got to do?
absolutely. Yeah.
What about in terms of decisions that you've made along the way? What are some of the critical decisions that you've made that have made all the difference?
I think like Rob and I made a deliberate focus on people and culture very early on. So I worked at Deloitte, PwC, these big engines, and like as much as I love them as companies to work for, like I didn't have total alignment to the values. And so a big focus on values and culture from day one. Like we've got 5 values that at Shippit, they came from day one, where we sat at a pub and worked them out together. And it's not only posters on the wall for us, it's brought into our recruitment process where stages of the recruitment process are geared towards certain values. Performance management, it's not just about like the metrics and how you've hit and what you've hit in terms of hitting your numbers. It's also how you delivered them against the values. And so these things have been really important for us from the get-go. And when people join us, or when people interview, or when I interview people to join Shippit, the first question is, oh, what's the culture like? And I implore them to step outside and talk to someone. That's the best way for people to really understand, not from me, not from the posters on the wall, but from the people. And so I think that's been a crucial step in the business very early on. Second one would be choosing the right people around you, not only from a work perspective, but also from a life partner perspective. So having a wife that's super supportive and being able to be that ear that's objective to everything, I think that like at the end of the day, they're marrying you, the business, and your business partners. And so making sure that like that also works in good symbiosis, I think is something that very people think about critically. And then I would say like the age old adage, and this is probably one of the other weaknesses I've had in the past, which is um, hire slow, fire fast. I've heard that around the traps many times, and it couldn't be any more true. Like having the wrong people in the seat, maybe they just need to be in a different seat, or they might not be on the seat at all. It's figuring out that quickly versus trying to put the square peg in the round hole. I think that's and I empathize with early stage founders as well. Like I heard that when we started, and I'm like, but you don't have a brand then in terms of company, so you can't attract talent. So like I get it. Like, oh, if I let this person go, I like anyone in the seat's better than no one in the seat. Like that mentality, I think that kind of paralyzes you along the way. And I think I could have gotten better at that over the last few years.
It's interesting because that's something that you really do. And I heard that when I first started my business sort of back in 2007. And I heard it from an accountant, and it made so much sense, but it's also easier said than done.
Yeah, for sure.
You really got to sort of uh, learn it by doing and experiencing as you progress to get better and better at it. But it is quite profound, and as simple as it is,
Yeah.
but really understanding that makes all the difference.
Yeah. And it's being deliberate about that stuff. Like we now we've put in some talent mapping in the business, like looking at critical roles, looking at succession planning, like all of these. We've got our big boy pants on now, basically.
Yeah.
And so because we are a much bigger business, we've got like massive customers, which I mentioned earlier, which are relying on us as if we're like electricity or water. If we go off,
Yeah.
operations go off. So we're mission critical when it comes to software. And so we need to act like that as a company.
Yeah, okay. That's in terms of like some of the challenges you face, what would be a couple of the biggest challenges or mistakes that you've made along the way that you've sort of had to correct?
Yeah, I think like many of them originate from people, to be quite honest. And I would say the challenges over the last 8 years has trying to evolve as an individual. Um, Me in particular, like as I said to you, like the company is growing. I need to evaluate myself whether or not I'm growing. Like I need to look at whether or not I'm deserved in the role that I'm in, to be quite frank, because you need to lead by example. And personal development is something that I've been trying to focus on over the last couple of years because what I was finding was I was putting myself into people roles which in domains in which I had no expertise. And I was just like figuring it out, guessing along the way type thing. And trying to get the expert in really early on would probably be like one of the key pieces of advice I've got. And you don't actually need to pay for someone. Like people, as you said at the start of this call, people just like talking and people like to help. And so being able to tap into like people's authenticity and their expertise by picking up the phone is a piece of advice that I got handed down from my dad, right? Like you don't ask, you don't get. And so I think that, yeah. And so I think that being able to pick up the phone and talk to the experts who will be able to help you with at least a framework or a way of thinking is something that I have like made proactive steps towards doing more at. And then I would say that yeah, being able to also take time off, I think is a thing that like is underappreciated. Um, Myself and Rob did mention, I did mention that we focused on culture. We also focused on work-life balance. And what I mean by work-life balance, like, isn't a 9 to 5 thing, right? Like, if you're a
Yeah, yeah,
founder,
yeah.
it
It's
isn't.
a hot topic when you start talking work-life balance because everyone's got their own interpretation of what that means, right?
Yeah. Whether you're a founder, there's no work-life balance, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like it's actually how your life, the intertwining of work and life and what's important at certain times is how I
Yeah,
see things.
yeah.
And so I think like historically, I haven't ever like taken much time off, but then just to recharge the batteries, like go away, like it just gives you a fresh outlook on things. And like it is really it's a marathon. It isn't a sprint. I'm historically a sprinter and I've gotten into longer distance running now. Literally, I have.
Yeah. Well, it's a
And
good metaphor for the journey, right? Like
yeah,
anything
yeah,
that, especially like you say, it's so easy, especially people who are driven. It's and are ambitious. It's very natural for them to push, 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 and there comes a point where it's not sustainable. And I
yeah,
think that point, whatever you wherever you want to spend your time is probably fine because every minute you spend doing something is a choice. Uh,
yes,
but there comes a time when you're spending. It's like if you're doing exercise or weights, you can work too hard. You need to give your body time to recover so that you don't overdo it. And it's the same with work. You need to work hard and all that sort of stuff. But if you go too much, it's not going to be sustainable. I even worked out myself years ago that every quarter I needed to take a long weekend and just like go away for a few days. And it didn't need to be much. It was a weekend plus a day. But having those sort of little um, mini breaks
yeah,
along the way was really, really important in terms of being able to know that there was a stop.
yeah.
And so you could go hard and work hard and do everything you need to do, but you knew there was a little stop. And that was just enough to take a breath, if you like. But then it also let you uh, reload for the next section. And it was just that little psychological shift in the way of doing it. It let you breathe and let you keep doing what you do even better.
It's
Um,
true, and it's the irony is like in software development, like practices today, where it's about 2 week sprints. It doesn't really afford you that break, right? Unless you're deliberate about it. And like Rob had his first child when we started Shippit, literally in that year. And so he would make it a point to leave work at 4:30 for bath time. I never understood that. Now I've got an 18-month-old and I'm out the door at 4:30. So I can build a relationship with my daughter. Um, but then later on, like you'll pick it up in the like later in the night, or you'll pick it up on the weekend. It is what it is. But then having those clear markers in terms of being able to break is crucial, I think.
yeah, that stuff really matters because what people often don't realize until later is that, with your kids especially, it doesn't matter what you do, whatever profession, um, high performer or not. At the end of the day, your kids are only small for a very short period of time, and then they're not. You know what I mean? Those couple of years, once you get through that first couple of years, and my kids are all grown up. I've got 4 kids; they're all over 20 now. So yeah, so they're sort of all. I think we've only got one at home these days, so we're nearly empty nesters, right? Um, but once they go from being, 1 or 2, and they then become toddlers, small kids, etc., you don't get that back again. So it's a very fleeting moment in their life, and it's really important. And I respect people giving that the time that it needs, no matter what you're doing, because you don't get that back. Like it's fleeting.
It's true, and like even little things like I picked up recently, like I was in a habit of like being on my phone while looking after my kid, and I'm like,
Yeah,
I just got to put this away, right? Like
yeah,
little things like that, which
yeah,
you got to be deliberate about. And so, like, I want to be present as a dad and a positive influence, and I don't think I can do that if I've got those distractions around me.
yeah. And you do have to be deliberate about it because phones these days, we know what they're like. You got to be deliberate, and especially when you're busy.
Yeah,
It's only certain amount of hours in a day, right?
yeah.
What about the best advice you were ever given as you were progressing with the business?
Yeah, I touched on it earlier. Like my dad, when I was growing up, I would also always see him negotiate for a deal. Uh, and I used to go out in Western Sydney, a place called Trash and Treasure, where my dad would used to go to bargain hunt for tools, like household tools. It taught me that like don't ask, don't get. And when we started Shippit, like the first person I reached out to was a guy called Luke Condon, who was heading up. I think he set up the Iconics supply chain very early on. So the retailer, the Iconic. And I'm just like, I just need to talk to this guy. Like, just reach out. I'm sure he'll want to have a chat. And we had a chat about like where we saw the future of logistics. And it's really how I'm seeing it play out now. Right. And so I think myself and Rob have always had that attitude of being able to cold call, cold email, LinkedIn store, just reach out for the experts. And like, I don't know, like I look at the likes of Mike Cannon Brooks or someone like Richard White from Wise Tech. Like these guys are super smart, or like Elon. Like I've never thought myself as like the intellectual smart, but more around the ability to be able to pull together perspectives and come up with my own informed decision. And so on that basis, like I think the advice has been always been around like um like use the network around you and also the network that's not around you. And what I mean by that is like go to those like startup events and go to like the meetups. Like you'll be really surprised at the types of people you'll meet there. And sliding doors moments happen more often than not. And I think that being able to then be open to taking on information and feedback is something that I would say is a crucial piece of advice that I got given early on.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 people that come to mind when you sort of talk about that sort of thing. It's one Steve Jobs, and the other's Kobe Bryant, and both of those guys obviously were the very best at what they did. But they both told stories around how they would pick up the phone and ring the best in the world at some sort of profession or whatever it might be, and just pick their brain. Um, and I mean, Steve Jobs tells a story, I think, with was it the the founder of IBM, I think it was, or someone like that. When he was a kid, he wrote to him or rang him. Actually, I have to go and find the story, but I remember reading it not that long ago, where he looked him up in the phone book, as it was back then, and he was actually there, and rang him, and he was like 12 or 14, got invited to go to IBM, and I think it was IBM, and actually look at some of the stuff and got to know them. So just by asking, he got such an incredible experience. Kobe Bryant was another one where he would actually. I remember him telling a story about how he reached out to the conductor of an orchestra, a world famous orchestra, because he wanted to understand how to be a better leader, coordinating a team and running a group.
I think
And
I'm a big basketball fan. There's many things that Kobe had, and one is relentless work ethic, and things like getting the advice from everyone. there's that classic photo of him and MJ on the halfway line asking Michael Jordan for advice, and he just picked him to parts as to like what he needed to do. And that's an example. Like that is an archetype, like reaching out and asking for help.
Yeah, I love those stories. And the incredible part is they often get insights that you would never have got if you didn't ask, right? And it just incredible that people will share what they share. Okay, final 4 quick questions. Business person that you admire the most, or a few business people that you admire, and who they are and why.
Starting within my periphery and like going a bit further out. Uh, I know, like people I've worked with like closely at Shippit, like as investors who've helped me along the journey. Danny Gallardi, he's on our cap table. I've known him since we were at uni together. He's a founder of a fund called Treble Capital, from operator to investor. Boy from Wollongong. Pick up the phone with that guy; he'll give you the real answer, which is like just inspiring because it's so fundamental. He's so fundamental. The likes of Justin Littman from EVP, he's also a person that is very sound on like the fundamentals of a business, and he knows what good looks like, and he's able to provide that advice, which I love. Going a bit further out, like founders that I look up to are probably Mike Ford from SiteMinder. Like he's did a really great job with that. He's in a great place now, having done their IPO, I think 12, 24 months ago. Richard White is the wizard, right? What he's done with WiseTech, it's a $27 billion listed business, started off at 750 million at the IPO. He is an example of combination of organic growth and growth through acquisition, knowing what the end state has, what he wanted to get to, and really building towards that, irrespective of what shareholders wanted. And then I would say Satya from Microsoft. Like, man, to pick that up off Bill Gates and then do what he's done over the last however many years, like, hats off to that. Like, seeing what he's done with the company, the move to cloud, new products like Teams, like it's incredible.
Being what they're doing now with AI, incorporating some of that open AI stuff is like 100%. Next level, right? And just even in terms of the deal they did to tie up what they needed to tie up.
It just feels as though he's like skating to where the puck is going, right? Like
right,
head of the game on that. So incredible. Yeah. So I would say like that
list. I like it. What about business books?
Oh,
favorites.
The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've
Horowitz.
Yeah.
Ben Horowitz. Yeah. Good book.
Yeah. Good book because like as a founder, it answers all the questions that you need answered. And it says them brutally honestly as well. Like things like, you hired your friend, how do you get rid of them? Like that's questions like that.
Yeah.
And then I also really liked Good to Great. I think that was a good book as well. Yeah.
Jim Collins.
They're my 2 books.
Top 2. I like them. What about quotes on business or leadership, life? Anything that you sort of live by or like to go to when the chips are down? Anything?
Yeah, definitely. Like if you don't ask, you don't get. But the other philosophy that I've always, myself and Rob have always lived by are like, there's not too many one-way door decisions, like to take an Amazon view of the world. Like there's not too many decisions where you can't reverse, right? And there is never a like situation that we've never been able to get ourselves around, right? And so like knowing, I think it might be a mindset thing that knowing things will always just work out is like a level of positivity that myself and Rob have always had. But what that also means is sometimes you just need to like get through it. And it's going to be painful. It's going to be hard, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And like at the end of the day, we've seen enough and we've done enough in terms of decision making over the last 20 years in our careers that now we're like, should be pretty confident that the calls that we're making are the right calls. And so not to say that we're never wrong, like we're wrong many a time, but it's really the the framework of knowing that you can spend too much time on trying to decide on a decision that can be reversible. It's like it's a waste of time. So
Yeah. Well,
like that's
you're backing your ability then to then, if you do make the wrong decision, is to correct it.
exactly. And like there's this huge human aspect that people fail to recognize when it comes to business and strategy. And like just have the conversation, pick up the phone. Like
Mm,
customers shitty at me because our system went down. We're going to talk to them. What can we do
yeah.
about it? Right? Like that human aspect is what I think a lot of people in business fail to keep top of mind, and something myself and Rob prioritize quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good philosophy, because at the end of the day, that communication, keeping it open, it sometimes just can eliminate an issue just from being able to talk about it.
It's
Something
all
that
about
could be,
expectation management.
yeah, absolutely. What's next for Shippit?
We have a pretty good, like we've still got a really healthy balance sheet. I'm really focused on growth in Southeast Asia. It's like sub 5% of our overall business, and I'll try and get it to 20%. And it will be through a combination of acquisition, which we've done, and organic growth. We've done the product integration already, which is great. As I mentioned at the start of the call, our ambition as a company is 200 million shipments without waste. That means annualized 200 million shipments on our platform without waste, because we truly believe that we can impact the impact of, sorry, we can truly impact the carbon emissions as a result of e-commerce. And we can do that through creating more efficient logistics networks by pushing parcels into areas which have got capacity. And what that means is our carrier partners don't need to build more warehouses, and they need to buy more trucks. They need to lean on other logistics partners to fulfill their deliveries. And so like we've got pretty ambitious plans around that. And the goal is to really create what we call the global distribution system for the logistics industry. So not too dissimilar from airlines, where you've got one airline ticket that can work cross carrier. Like logistics should be able to do the same thing, because there should be one API that does all of that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, William, thanks very much for your time. I've really loved talking to you and hearing about your journey and your insights, and really looking forward to seeing where the company and your career goes. It's really exciting.
Awesome, Dion. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, William. Cheers, mate.